Jack had always considered himself lucky to have a stable job and a loving family. His relationship with his wife, Monica, had never been perfect, but like most marriages, they had their ups and downs. He trusted her, deeply in fact, never once doubting her love and loyalty. So, when Jack came home early from work that day, he was expecting to surprise his wife. Little did he know that what awaited him would forever alter the course of his life. The house was eerily quiet when he stepped inside. Usually, Monica would have music playing, or at the very least, the television on in the background. Jack immediately noticed something was off. As he made his way through the house, the usual sounds of life were absent, no clattering dishes, no voices. Then, from upstairs, Jack heard something that made his blood run cold. Faint sounds, muffled, intimate sounds, were coming from the direction of their bedroom. At first, he froze, unsure of what to make of it. His heart pounded in his chest, and every instinct screamed at him to turn around, leave, and pretend this wasn't happening. But something inside him pushed him forward, his footsteps slow and heavy as he ascended the stairs. Each creak of the steps echoed in the silence, heightening the tension that had wrapped around his chest like a vice. As he reached the top of the stairs, the sounds became clearer. A low voice, unmistakably his father's, murmured something Jack couldn't quite make out, followed by a breathless giggle, Monica's giggle. Jack's world began to tilt as the realization struck him, sharp and cruel. His wife, Monica, was in their bedroom with his father. The door was slightly ajar, and Jack couldn't stop himself from peeking through the crack. What he saw on the other side made his heart break and his stomach turn. There, in their bed, the bed they had shared for years, were Monica and his father, tangled in the sheets, oblivious to his presence. Jack stumbled back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He felt as though the floor had fallen out from under him, like he was free-falling into an abyss from which there was no escape. His mind raced, a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and deep betrayal swirling together into something he couldn't process. How long had this been going on? How could they do this to him? His father, of all people, his own flesh and blood. The weight of it all threatened to crush him. He needed to get out, to escape the suffocating realization that had hit him like a freight train. Without thinking, he turned and fled down the stairs, his vision blurring with unshed tears. He could still hear them upstairs, completely unaware of his presence, of the devastation they had just wrought on his life. Jack slammed the front door behind him, the noise reverberating in the quiet afternoon. He didn't stop to think about where he was going, he just needed to be anywhere but there. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind still reeling from the shock of what he had just witnessed. How had things come to this? Jack had always trusted Monica implicitly, and his father had always been someone he looked up to, someone he admired. The betrayal cut deep, leaving wounds that Jack knew would never fully heal. He felt as though his entire world had been ripped out from under him, leaving him standing on shaky ground with nothing to hold on to. For the next several hours, Jack wandered aimlessly through the city, the events of the afternoon playing on a loop in his mind. He couldn't escape the images, the sounds, the visceral pain that had taken hold of him. Eventually, he found himself sitting on a bench in a nearby park, staring blankly at the ground as the sun began to set. His mind was numb, his heart shattered into a million pieces. He knew that when he returned home, nothing would ever be the same again. When he finally pulled himself together enough to go back, Jack knew he had to confront them, though he had no idea how. The betrayal was too raw, too deep. And yet, the only thing he could feel was the hollow ache in his chest, the realization that everything he had thought was solid and real had been a lie. When Jack finally returned home, the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over. Every step he took toward the house felt heavier, his mind replaying the betrayal over and over. The disbelief had turned into a blinding rage, his thoughts consumed by the image of his father and Monica together. The more he thought about it, the more he felt the need to do something, to release the fury that was clawing at his insides. He couldn't just let this slide, he couldn't let them get away with it. As he approached the front door, Jack didn't hesitate. He pushed it open with a force that made it slam against the wall, the sound echoing through the house. He could hear them inside, laughing softly like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just ripped his world apart. Jack stormed into the living room, his vision narrowing on his father, who was sitting on the couch with Monica beside him. The room, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a cage, trapping Jack in his rage. His father's casual demeanor, the smugness in his relaxed posture, only fueled the fire in Jack's chest. Without a word, Jack crossed the room in 2 long strides and threw a punch directly into his father's face. The impact was immediate, his knuckles meeting bone with a sickening thud. His father stumbled backward, blood trickling from his nose, the shock of the hit written all over his face. "What the hell, Jack?" his father shouted, holding his face, blood dripping between his fingers. But Jack didn't care. He wasn't interested in hearing anything from him. The betrayal, the lies, the disrespect, it was all too much. "You!" Jack's voice trembled with rage, his entire body shaking with the force of it. "You come into my house, and you do this? With her?" He glared at Monica, who had frozen, eyes wide in fear, but his attention snapped back to his father. "I trusted you," Jack growled through gritted teeth, barely able to control the venom in his words. "You were my father. My father, for God's sake. And this is what you do?" His voice broke slightly, the raw hurt behind his anger bubbling to the surface. He took a step closer, towering over his father, who was still cradling his face. His father looked up at him, guilt mixing with shock and a flicker of fear. "Jack, let's just talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Jack cut him off, his voice cold and hard. "I don't want to see you. I don't want to know you. Get out of my house, and don't ever come back." He pointed toward the door, his arm trembling from the sheer intensity of his emotions. "Jack, please," his father started, but Jack's voice rose, filled with a deep bitterness that shook him to his core. "Get out, Jack roared, his voice cracking under the weight of his fury. "Get out before I do something I'll regret even more. I never want to see your face again." His father stood slowly, wiping the blood from his face with his sleeve, his eyes pleading, but Jack was unmoved. As his father turned to leave, Jack's anger flared again, and he shouted after him. "You're no longer my father. You're nothing to me." The words stung even as they left his mouth, but Jack couldn't stop them. The man who had raised him, the man he had respected, had betrayed him in the most unforgivable way. There was no going back from this. His father hesitated for a moment at the door, as though he wanted to say something, to fix what had been broken, but he knew there was no fixing this. Without another word, he stepped out of the house, the door slamming shut behind him. And then there was silence. Jack stood there, his breath heavy, his fists still clenched at his sides, shaking with the adrenaline that coursed through his veins. His mind raced, his heart pounding, but one thing was clear, his relationship with his father was over. Monica hadn't moved from the couch, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Jack turned to her, and for a moment, the fury that had been directed at his father shifted to her. "And you," Jack said, his voice low, dangerously calm now. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Monica opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked terrified, as though she finally realized just how far things had gone. But Jack wasn't interested in her excuses, her explanations. "Pack your things," Jack said, his voice as cold as ice. "You're leaving too." "Jack, please, we can." "Don't." Jack interrupted, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't try to explain this. Don't try to fix this. You've destroyed everything." Monica stood slowly, tears welling in her eyes, but Jack didn't care. He couldn't care, not anymore. He couldn't bear to look at her, to be in the same room with her after what she had done. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. "You have until morning," Jack said, turning his back on her, his voice hollow now. "And then I never want to see you again either." Monica sobbed softly behind him, but Jack didn't turn around. He couldn't. The man he had been that morning was gone, replaced by someone broken, someone angry, someone who no longer recognized the people who had once meant everything to him. As the night wore on, Jack stood in the darkness of the living room, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. He had lost his father, his wife, and his sense of security, all in one brutal afternoon. And now, he was left to pick up the pieces of a life he no longer recognized. After Jack had thrown both his father and Monica out of the house, the anger inside him didn't subside. If anything, it grew stronger, festering like an open wound. The house was empty now, but the silence was suffocating, filled with the weight of betrayal and heartbreak. Jack couldn't shake the image of his father and Monica together, laughing, touching, completely oblivious to the destruction they had caused. Sitting in the darkened living room, Jack felt something shift inside him. Kicking them out hadn't been enough. It wasn't nearly enough. They needed to feel what he was feeling. They needed to hurt the way he was hurting. His father had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and Monica had destroyed their marriage, the life they had built together. And yet, they both walked away from it, free from the pain that had consumed Jack's every thought. It wasn't fair. They deserved more. Jack stood up, pacing the room, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. He couldn't just let them walk away from this without consequences. They needed to pay for what they had done, and Jack was going to make sure of it. He grabbed his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he opened the messages. There were still texts between Monica and his father, their secret conversations, the ones they thought Jack would never see. He felt a wave of disgust as he scrolled through them, each word a reminder of their betrayal. They had been so careless, so confident that they could keep this hidden from him. They had treated him like a fool, and now it was his turn to take control. An idea formed in Jack's mind, dark and twisted, but it filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the moment he had caught them. He would expose them, publicly, brutally. If they were going to destroy his life, then he would make sure everyone knew who they really were. He wanted them to feel the shame, the humiliation, the gut-wrenching pain that had been tearing him apart since the moment he walked into that room. Jack quickly transferred the incriminating texts, the photos, and the details of their affair to his computer. He set up an anonymous email account, attaching everything, every dirty little secret, every moment of their deceit. But that wasn't enough. He had more in mind. Monica was well known in their community, always the one who organized events, posted about their perfect life on social media, always projecting the image of the loving wife. Jack gritted his teeth at the hypocrisy. It was time for everyone to see the truth. He began drafting posts, carefully crafting his words, making sure to include every sordid detail. He posted the texts, the pictures, everything, to her social media accounts. One by one, he hit publish, making sure that their family, friends, and even her colleagues would see the truth. There was no going back now. But Jack didn't stop there. His father, his supposed role model, would not escape unscathed either. Jack knew how much his father valued his reputation. He was a respected man in their small town, known for his integrity, for being a stand-up figure in the community. That was about to change. Jack called his father's workplace, leaving an anonymous tip, claiming there had been an inappropriate relationship that was about to go public. He sent copies of the texts and photos to key people in his father's social circle, making sure they knew exactly what kind of man he truly was. He even sent the evidence to his father's closest friends, men who had known him for decades. The betrayal wouldn't just be between Jack and his father, it would ripple out into every part of his father's life. Jack knew it was cruel. He knew it was ruthless. But he didn't care. Not anymore. They had destroyed his life, his marriage, and his relationship with the one man he had trusted above all others. They had shown no mercy, and neither would he. Hours passed as Jack worked, his focus sharp, his heart pounding with adrenaline. When he finally finished, he sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, the weight of what he had done starting to settle over him. He had sent everything out, and soon, there would be no way to take it back. His phone buzzed with notifications, people reacting to the posts, messages flooding in from friends and family who had seen the revelations. The fallout was immediate. Monica called him first, her voice frantic and panicked. "Jack, what the hell did you do?" she screamed, her voice trembling. "You posted everything. My job, my family, everyone's seeing this. How could you do this to me?" Jack felt nothing as he listened to her. There was no pity, no sympathy. "How could I do this to you?" he echoed, his voice cold and detached. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you slept with my father." "Jack, please, we can fix this, take it down, I'll do anything, please," she begged, but Jack wasn't interested in bargaining. "It's too late for that, Monica. You made your choice. Now you can live with the consequences." He hung up before she could say another word. Not long after, his father called. His voice was quieter, more restrained, but Jack could hear the desperation in it. "Son, please, I know you're angry, but this isn't the way to handle it. You've destroyed my life. Do you really want to do this?" Jack clenched his jaw, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "You destroyed my life, Dad," he spat. "You ruined everything. And now, everyone is going to know what kind of man you really are." His father started to say something else, but Jack ended the call. He couldn't listen to any more excuses, any more justifications. The damage was done, and now they would both have to live with it. For the first time that day, Jack felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He had taken action. He had made sure they felt the pain, the humiliation, the shame that they had forced him to endure. He had torn apart their perfect lives, just as they had torn apart his. Jack sat back, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. It wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But for now, the pain didn't feel as unbearable. For now, he had some sense of control. As the days passed, Jack felt the crushing weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. His once beloved home, which had been filled with memories of laughter and warmth, now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of the betrayal and the life he had lost. Every corner of the house, every room, every piece of furniture, carried the ghosts of his past. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't stay here anymore. One evening, after staring blankly at the walls for what felt like hours, Jack made the decision. He would leave. He would sell the house, leave the city, and start over somewhere far away. There was nothing left for him here, no family, no reason to stay. The thought of waking up every day in this place, surrounded by reminders of his father and Monica, was unbearable. He needed a clean slate, a new beginning, somewhere where he could forget everything and everyone. It didn't take long for Jack to start the process. He contacted a realtor the next morning, putting the house on the market without hesitation. The house had been a part of his life for years, but now, it felt like a burden he needed to be rid of. He watched as the realtor took pictures, listed the property, and spoke in enthusiastic tones about how quickly it would sell. Jack barely heard her. His mind was already elsewhere, imagining a life far away, in a different country, a different world. After a week, the offers started coming in, and Jack made arrangements to finalize the sale. It all felt surreal, moving out of the home he had once built with Monica, the life they had shared now nothing but ashes. The legal documents were signed, and just like that, the house no longer belonged to him. He packed up what little he wanted to take with him, leaving behind most of the furniture, the memories, and the past. As the departure date loomed closer, Jack realized something strange. Despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal, he didn't want to leave completely alone. The thought of starting fresh by himself felt daunting, even if it was what he had planned. He had lived so much of his life with someone beside him, and now the idea of going off into the unknown without anyone to talk to, without anyone to share this transition, filled him with a deep sadness. One night, on a whim, Jack picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His thumb hovered over Monica's name. She was still his wife, at least in the eyes of the law, but that bond had been shattered. His heart ached just seeing her name, but there was someone else he hadn't thought of in a long time. His ex-wife, Julia. They had parted ways years ago, amicably enough, though the wounds had taken time to heal. He hadn't spoken to her in years, not since their divorce, but now, in this moment of desperation, Jack felt an urge to reach out. Perhaps it was because Julia had once been such an important part of his life. Perhaps he needed a sense of familiarity before he stepped into the unknown. He hesitated, his finger hovering over her name for what felt like an eternity. Would she even pick up? Would she want to talk to him, after all this time? A part of him was scared of the rejection, but another part of him knew he had to try. He couldn't go through this next phase of his life completely alone. With a deep breath, Jack pressed the call button. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. Jack almost hung up, thinking it was a mistake, but then, on the 4th ring, a voice answered. "Hello?" Julia's voice was softer than he remembered, but still unmistakably hers. Hearing it brought back a rush of memories, good and bad. "Julia, it's Jack," he said, his voice a little shakier than he had intended. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Jack wondered if she was going to hang up. But then, she spoke again, cautiously. "Jack? Wow, it's been a while. How are you?" He chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "I've been better. A lot's happened, Julia. I'm selling the house. Leaving the country, actually." There was a longer pause this time. "Selling the house?" Julia asked, sounding surprised. "I never thought you'd leave that place." "Yeah, well, things change," Jack replied, the weight of those words settling over him. "I can't stay here anymore, Julia. Too many memories, too much pain. I need to get out, start over." "I see," Julia said quietly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jack." He hesitated before speaking again, unsure of how to phrase the next part. He didn't want to sound pathetic or desperate, but the truth was, he felt a deep loneliness gnawing at him. He wasn't ready to face this next chapter of his life entirely on his own. "Listen," Jack began, his voice softening, "I know this is probably out of the blue, but I don't want to leave alone. I'm heading somewhere far, somewhere new, and I guess I thought maybe you'd want to come with me? Just for a little while. We could take a trip together, like we used to. I know things didn't end perfectly between us, but I don't know, I just thought it would be nice to have some company." There was a long silence on the other end, and Jack's heart began to race. He had put himself out there, and now, he felt exposed. Vulnerable. He wasn't sure if Julia would laugh at him or hang up, but before he could take it back, she finally spoke. "Jack. I don't know," she said slowly, her tone uncertain. "It's been so long, and we're both in such different places now. I don't know if that's a good idea." "I know," Jack said quickly, not wanting to pressure her. "I know it sounds crazy. But I've been through hell lately, Julia. And I don't know if I can do this alone. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's just a trip. A chance to get away, to clear our heads. I don't want to be alone right now. And I don't think you'd want that either." There was another pause, and Jack held his breath, waiting for her answer. Finally, Julia sighed softly. "All right, Jack. I'll think about it. But no promises. We've been through a lot, and I need time to process this." Jack exhaled, relief flooding through him. "That's all I'm asking for, Julia. Just think about it." "I will," she said, her voice softening a little. "Take care of yourself, Jack. We'll talk soon." And with that, the call ended, leaving Jack sitting alone in the darkened living room, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing down on him. He didn't know if Julia would agree to go with him, but the fact that she hadn't shut him down completely gave him a glimmer of hope. As he prepared for the next chapter of his life, one thing was clear: no matter what happened next, Jack was ready to leave it all behind. The city, the house, the pain. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to face it entirely alone. A few days had passed since Jack made that unexpected call to Julia. He hadn't expected much, really, maybe a polite decline or, at best, a cautious promise to consider it. But part of him had been holding on to a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she'd say yes. And if she did, it might be the beginning of something new, an adventure to distract him from the wreckage of his life. It was late afternoon when his phone rang, the screen lighting up with Julia's name. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at it for a moment, nerves tightening his chest. He hadn't realized just how much he'd been waiting for this call until now. Swallowing hard, he answered. "Hey, Julia," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you." There was a brief pause on the other end before Julia spoke, her voice soft and calm, but carrying an undercurrent of something more, hesitation, maybe, or uncertainty. "Hey, Jack. I've been thinking a lot about your offer, and I've decided that I'm going to take you up on it." Jack blinked in surprise, his heart racing a little faster. "Really? That's great. I wasn't sure if you'd want to." "Yeah," she replied with a small sigh, "I think it could be good for both of us, you know? A change of scenery. But there's something you need to know before we go any further." Jack frowned slightly, leaning forward. "What is it?" "I have a child now, Jack," she said, her tone careful but firm. "She's 3 years old. Her name's Lily." For a moment, Jack was too stunned to respond. He hadn't even considered that Julia's life had moved forward in such a big way. He pictured Julia as he had known her years ago, but clearly, so much had changed since then. A child. That was a huge part of her life that he hadn't even known existed. "Oh," Jack said quietly, trying to process the information. I didn't know." "I know," she said gently. "I didn't expect you to. But if I'm going to do this trip with you, I can't leave her behind. She's my whole world, Jack. I would need to bring her with me." Jack sat in silence for a moment, letting the reality of it sink in. A trip with Julia was one thing, but traveling with a 3-year-old child was entirely different. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. Part of him had imagined this journey as a chance to reconnect with someone from his past, to heal and figure out the next step in his life, but the idea of bringing a young child into that equation changed the dynamic entirely. He rubbed a hand over his face, sighing deeply. "Julia, I don't know anything about kids. I've never really been around them much, and I didn't expect this." "I know," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I get that. But I can't leave her behind, Jack. If we do this, you're going to have to be okay with Lily coming along. It won't be easy, traveling with a kid never is, but if you're serious about us taking this trip, then this is the reality. I'm a mom now, and that comes first." Jack nodded to himself, thinking it over. The thought of having a 3-year-old along for the trip wasn't what he had envisioned, but then again, nothing about his life right now was what he had envisioned. And maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to do something different, to embrace a new kind of experience. After all, he wasn't running away from his problems, he was starting fresh. And perhaps this was part of that fresh start. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice steady. "Okay. I understand. If Lily comes with us, we'll make it work. I don't know much about kids, but I'm willing to learn." Julia was silent for a moment, as if surprised by his quick acceptance. "Are you sure, Jack? This isn't going to be some carefree trip. Lily's young, and she needs a lot of attention. It could be challenging." "I'm sure," Jack said, though he still felt a bit uncertain. "If you're willing to come with me, then I'm willing to figure it out. I don't know what I'm doing, but I think we can make it work. I could use some company, and it sounds like you could too." There was a soft laugh on the other end of the line, and for the first time in days, Jack felt something lift in his chest, something lighter, something hopeful. "Okay," Julia said, a smile evident in her voice. "We'll figure it out together. Let's do this, Jack. We'll take it one step at a time." Jack smiled, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't going to be what he had originally imagined, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe this trip, with Julia and her daughter, was exactly what he needed to start putting the pieces of his life back together. "When do we leave?" Julia asked, her voice light and filled with excitement. "As soon as you're ready," Jack replied, the weight of his past already beginning to lift. "We can leave everything behind and just go. A fresh start, for both of us." Julia laughed softly. "Well, I have to make sure Lily's all packed, but once we're ready, we're in. I think we could both use this break from the world." Jack agreed, already picturing the journey ahead. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't seem quite so dark. It wasn't just about leaving the city or the house, it was about rediscovering who he was and what his life could be, with the promise of new experiences and a chance to heal. And maybe, just maybe, this trip wouldn't be as lonely as he had feared. As the weeks passed and Jack, Julia, and little Lily traveled together, something unexpected began to happen. The pain that had once consumed Jack's every thought began to fade, replaced by moments of peace, laughter, and warmth, things he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the new scenery, the adventure of being in a different country, or the chance to escape the ghosts of his past. It was something deeper, something tied to the presence of Julia and her daughter in his life. At first, the trip had been about survival, about running away from the pain of betrayal and starting over. But with Julia by his side, Jack began to feel more than just relief. The familiar ease between them, the way they could talk for hours about anything or sit in comfortable silence, reminded him of what had once been so special about their relationship all those years ago. As they spent more time together, exploring new cities, sharing meals, watching Lily grow more comfortable around him, Jack realized that the love he had once felt for Julia was still there. It hadn't disappeared with time or distance. If anything, it had simply been waiting, buried under the weight of the years they had spent apart. Julia, too, seemed to be thriving in their time together. The burdens of their past had been left behind, and they had both changed since their divorce. But the connection between them had never really been broken. They found themselves laughing at old jokes, reminiscing about memories that only the two of them shared, and even creating new ones, this time with Lily in tow, whose joy and energy brought a lightness to their days. One evening, after a long day of exploring a picturesque coastal town, the three of them sat on the beach, watching the sunset. Lily was playing in the sand nearby, her giggles filling the air. Jack and Julia sat side by side, their shoulders brushing lightly. The peacefulness of the moment was almost overwhelming, and Jack couldn't hold back the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind for days. "Julia," he began, his voice soft, "I never thought I'd be saying this, but, being here with you, with Lily, it's made me realize something." Julia turned to him, her expression curious but open. "What's that, Jack?" Jack took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon before meeting her eyes. "I think I still love you. I don't think I ever stopped. I know we've been through a lot, and life has taken us in different directions, but, being with you again has made me realize how much I've missed you. I don't want to lose this, us, again." Julia was silent for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Jack could feel his heart racing, unsure of how she would respond, but he had to say it. He had to tell her what had been building inside him for weeks. "Jack," she finally said, her voice soft, "I've been thinking the same thing. I didn't know how to bring it up. I didn't expect to feel this way again, but, it's there. The love, the connection, it's still there." Relief flooded through Jack, and he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I want to try again, Julia. I want us to be together. For real this time." Julia smiled, her eyes glistening in the fading light of the sunset. "I'd like that too, Jack. More than you know." They sat there, their hands intertwined, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and in that moment, everything felt right. It was as if all the pain, all the heartache of the past had led them back to this place, to each other. And now, they had a second chance. Over the next few months, Jack and Julia's relationship blossomed into something stronger and deeper than it had been before. Lily became a central part of their lives, and Jack found himself growing closer to her as well. The bond between them strengthened as they navigated the ups and downs of traveling with a child, but every challenge brought them closer together. Eventually, Jack knew what he had to do. He didn't want to lose Julia again. He didn't want to be apart from her or Lily. So, one night, in a quiet cafe overlooking a stunning European cityscape, Jack got down on one knee and asked Julia to marry him again. "I know we've done this before," Jack said, his voice filled with emotion, "but this time, I want to get it right. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Julia, and I want us to be a family, me, you, and Lily. Will you marry me?" Julia's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them, nodding as she reached out to pull him to his feet. "Yes, Jack. Yes, 1,000 times yes." They embraced, laughter bubbling between them as the other patrons clapped and cheered. It felt surreal, but in the best way possible. Jack had found his way back to the woman he had always loved, and this time, he wasn't going to let anything tear them apart. Not long after, they returned to the States for a small, intimate wedding. It wasn't about grand gestures or lavish ceremonies this time, it was about the love they had rediscovered, the family they were building, and the future they were embracing together. Lily was their flower girl, and the joy on her face was mirrored in both Jack and Julia's as they exchanged their vows, promising to love each other, through thick and thin, for the rest of their lives. After the wedding, Jack and Julia didn't shy away from sharing their happiness with the world. They posted pictures of their journey on every social media platform they could, beaming smiles from every corner of the globe, family photos with Lily in tow, candid moments that captured the love they had found again. Their friends and family flooded their pages with congratulations, astonished and delighted that life had brought them back together in such a beautiful way. As Jack scrolled through the comments one evening, he couldn't help but smile. Life had taken unexpected turns, and he had faced more heartbreak than he ever thought he could handle. But now, sitting beside his wife, and watching Lily play with a new toy on the living room floor, Jack realized he had found something far better than he had ever imagined. He had found love again. Real, lasting love. And this time, it was forever.